Standing Orders 6, 16, 18, 20, 42 subsection 5, 43 and 44 for the remainder of the day's sitting.
The question is that these aforementioned standing orders be suspended for the remainder. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Government businessman.
Government's business is the order.
Order number 8, in the name of the Honourable Prime Minister, to move the passing of a resolution that the Parliament of Barbados take note of the report of the Parliamentary Reform Commission 2024 and its recommendations.
Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And as I rise, let me also take the opportunity to welcome the students of George Lamming Primary School and the students of Ellerslie School. I'm particularly touched by the presence of those from George Lamming, and let me explain why not to in any way say anything about Ellerslie. But I, as a young Minister of Education, had the responsibility for bringing this school in concept into existence, and by doing the site visit that ultimately determined the location of where they go to school now, and that the school should come into existence. So I feel a sense of maternal care with respect to the George Lamming Primary School. But to those from Ellerslie as well, you have had a distinguished history in this country, and you have produced persons who have excelled in all levels of society. But above all else, you sit below the University of the West Indies campus at Cave Hill that should continue to remind you of all that is possible for you personally, and that one of yours should have risen to become the first woman ever to be principal of the Cave Hill campus from Ellerslie School, tells you what is possible when you keep your eyes gazed on the hill. I wish you all the very best. Madam Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, today this Parliament is considering the report of the Parliamentary Reform Commission. And this is a historic moment for us because it represents the recommendations and suggestions of Barbadians across the board, from all walks of life, collated, considered, and then evaluated recommendations made by the Parliamentary Reform Commission. And I say so because the last major reform to this Parliament came really in 1971, more than 54 years ago, when we saw the abolition of double-member constituencies and the introduction of single-member constituencies, which has guided this lower house for the last 54 years, and which also, other than the increase in the number of constituencies, has been the only reform of major import for the structure of this Parliament. But this is not only historic, the debate is happening in the same year that we will, in this chamber, remember and commemorate the 75th anniversary of the right to vote being given to all Barbadians over the age of 21 years old, without reference to how much property you own. It is important to remember, and I did not know that students were coming here this morning, but it is important to remember that the Representation of the People Act ushered in a right that was denied to the majority of people who lived in this country, on this island, for over 300 years. People like us could not vote. We're not given the opportunity to be able to vote. And that only those who own property, and I can assure you that even 100 years after the abolition of slavery, or to be more precise, 122 years after the abolition of slavery, ordinary people in their numbers, adults, could not vote to determine their destiny, could not seek to become firm craftsmen of their faith. You will excuse me, ma'am. Thank you. So that it is important to remember that this singular power conferring on the average Barbadian 21 years and older the right to vote was ushered in by this Barbados Labour Party under the leadership of the then Right Excellent Sir Grantley Herbert Adams, a national hero of this country, and I dare say the father of Barbados's democracy. Let me be very clear. For him to allow hawkers and agricultural workers and dockside workers and maids and gardeners and drivers and well diggers the right to vote when only the landed gentry, a phrase that modern Barbados would not even be familiar with today, for him to admit that possibility was a revolutionary act in this country in 1950 when the Representation of the People Bill was being debated in the lower house. I should tell you that it then went on to the upper chamber, but it was not proclaimed until the 20th of February, 1951. And I trust that this Parliament, Madam Deputy Speaker, will find a way to properly celebrate in the month of February next year and in the lead up to that time between the 10th of August 1950 when it was debated, I believe, in this honorable chamber. Sorry. The 17th of August, sorry, ma'am. 1950 when it was debated in this honorable chamber to when it was proclaimed on the 20th of February 1951 that we will find an appropriate way to educate the children of this country, the people of this nation, of what was done in their name 75 years ago, starting in this honorable chamber on the 17th of August 1950. And I say so too, because let me be clear, almost all of the decisions that this country has taken since 1951 have only been possible because of the passage of that legislation giving ordinary Barbadians the right to vote. Not looking at what property they owned or what station in life they had. And what are some of these benefits, Madam Deputy Speaker? The introduction of cabinet government, the attainment of independence in 1966, led by the father of independence, the Right Excellent Errol Walton Barrow. the attainment of Republican status in 2021, an act that will be more familiar to all of us, the introduction of free education through the construction of the schools in the 1950s and the actual conferral of free education in the 1960s. This has lifted so many Bajans out of poverty, allowing them the opportunity to be the best that they can be. The redistribution of land in a country where the majority of persons, even after slavery was abolished, were forced to live, were forced to provide their labor if they wanted to live on the tenantry attached to the plantation, even after slavery was abolished. And therefore, the act of Tom Adams, with the passage of the Tenantry's Freehold Purchase Act, conferring on the right of tens of thousands of Barbadians the ability to own their land at 10 cents a square foot, giving them the opportunity to buy land for the price of a pair of sneakers today, thereby giving them the chance to go and build a better and proper house, because the money was not taken up in the consumption with the land that they had to purchase. The introduction of unemployment benefit, something that was done before many developed countries were able to do it. And unemployment benefits made the difference between those who could live and not live, not just when you were laid off in different times by different companies, but when this country faced the greatest crisis of the shutdown of the COVID-19 pandemic since being an independent nation, the greatest crisis. The introduction of the minimum wage, more recently, setting a bar. And let me, as an aside, say I completely reject the assertions of the supermarket owner who has indicated that prices of food must go up purely because there's a minimum wage in this country. May I remind him that his prices did not go down when the corporation taxes were reduced by this government from 25% to 5.5% in 2019. May I remind him that in the same way that the government has chosen to shield freight costs since December 2019, and to be able to shield other costs, that it is possible, especially now that we are operating in choppy waters globally, for persons to recognize that you can't swim freestyle, and that if my markup and my return was 25% before, and my profits were at 15% or 12%, that I can do with 11 or 10%, largely because we have to carry everybody with us in these turbulent times. Madam Deputy Speaker, that representation of the People Act made the defining difference in the country that we have come to know and love. And without the right to vote, there would have been no opportunity for Mr. Barrow to say that we have been loitering on colonial premises for certainly too long. I say these things because the attainment of universal adult suffrage in this country is taken for granted, regrettably, by too many. This is a right, a precious right, that was secured by peaceful means in Barbados through strong and visionary leadership between the Barbados Labour Party and the Barbados Workers' Union working together. This is a right that the people of South Africa could only achieve after bloody battles for decades. And in fact, were only able to vote without reference to property, ownership, or race in 1994. almost 50 years after Barbadians secured that right peacefully. Madam Deputy Speaker, we have a duty to educate our people and to let them protect what they have, lest it is taken from them and they become subject again to the worst aspects of being victims of the dominion and domination of others, as was our experience as a colonial territory under the British. I start here, ma'am, because you can't really begin to understand the journey of the Parliamentary Reform Commission unless we appreciate how we got to this point. And I say often that the reason why we work so hard to pay forward, to allow our people to be the best that they can be, to put the social contract to which I've just referred in many respects together. Not all, because there's so many other achievements, but I've just highlighted a few. The reason why we have done this is because we live in a world today where imperial ambitions exist. And we live in a world today where the power of technology is greater than the power of the armadas and the flotillas that would have led to our being conquered 4 centuries ago. I want to repeat myself, ma'am, because unless we continue with vigilance, we will find ourselves under a new form of subjugation that is different in feel, but that, in fact, is as devastating as the ones that went before. And why do I say so? We have a world, and only today, the New York Times has an article about the division of the world between the haves and the have-nots with the growth of AI. And unless there is a way to level the playing field and to protect us from being victims of a wild, wild west, we will be at the mercy of others. Indeed, during COVID, we saw the raw expression of power akin to that Wild West again, in circumstances where it really ought not to have happened, and many were not expecting it because it was the exercise of brutal power rather than a commitment to work within the context of an international rules-based system. Export restrictions were imposed by many countries, ensuring that equipment that was needed to keep people's lives, to keep people alive, that equipment was not accessible. And Madam Deputy Speaker, this issue, therefore, of the right to vote is just the first step that our generation must now build on to ensure that it was not a Pyrrhic victory that Sir Grantley Adams and his generation achieved for us. Let me focus now on this report. The Cabinet is yet to take decisions on the recommendations of the Parliamentary Reform Commission. But I am of the view that this debate on the report will lead to valuable public discussion, which could help and will help to inform and guide us as we go forward across the board. The truth is that we've had some discussion already, and the government made this report available to the public since November last year. may I remind the honorable members in this chamber that the PRC, as we will come to call it, Parliamentary Reform Commission, the acronym PRC, was established in May of 2023 and delivered its report in April last year. During that time, the Commission had 10 town hall public meetings across the island. Included in this number was a special Zoom hall, which is a Zoom public hall, for the diaspora. There were also 13 private hearings and 55 internal meetings, many of which I'm told were full-day meetings. The Commission's public sessions were viewed online almost 30,000 times. The Commission also invited, received, and considered written and oral submissions from the general public, from organizations and interest groups, and indeed, they met with a number of experts in governance, political science, and related issues, including lecturers from the University of the West Indies at Cave Hill and at Mona. Madam Deputy Speaker, this level of engagement reaffirms a truth that has guided this administration since we took office in 2018, that governance must be ventilated openly, and that the public must always be invited into the room, even if only virtually. From our earliest days, we have insisted that democracy is not an act confined to casting a vote every 5 years, but a living and a breathing conversation between the government and the governed. The Commission's wide reach and public interaction, therefore, is not incidental. It is by design and a reflection of our unflinching commitment to transparency, to dialogue, and to inclusion. And indeed, only last night, we were in the communities again at the Glebe in St. George with the Ideas Forum, an exercise where this government goes monthly to people for the last 3 years, listening to and talking with the people of this nation. This, I am proud to say, is a hallmark of my government's approach to leadership. Let the records of this Parliament show our gratitude to the Commission, which was chaired by Sir Richard Cheltenham, and the Deputy Chair was Sir Roy Trotman. The members in alphabetical order, for fear of any prominence being given to anyone, were as follows: Mr. Corey Beckles, Dr. William Chandler, Dr. Richard Ishmael, Ms. Maxine McLean, and the Most Honourable Elizabeth Thompson. The Commission was serviced by the Clerk of Parliament, Mr. Pedro Eastman, and ably assisted by the Deputy Clerks, Beverly Gibbons and Ms. Suzanne Hamlin. I want to thank both the members of this Commission for their time and for their service to our country. I want to thank the members of this Parliament who worked to service this Commission and who recognize the importance of a timely submission to this Parliament. Let me also thank those Barbadians who took the time to be able to come forward and make submissions, who attended meetings in person or by Zoom, and who therefore contributed to this national outreach. I say that this Commission is historic because our historical circumstances were that as a colony of Westminster form, a Westminster form of government was imposed on us. And it is from this that our parliamentary system has been derived. This Parliament is the third oldest in the Commonwealth today, established in 1639. In 2021, we decided to become a republic. And since we attained independence from our colonial masters in November 1966, several other countries who were former colonies also achieved republican status, and new forms and models of government and new forms of parliamentary democracies have also evolved. For Barbados, the occasion and development of our own republic has presented the opportunity for us to ask ourselves, having come this far as a small state, ma'am, with few resources, having been the template of the most brutal slave society on the planet, the country in which racism was defined in its modern form, the passage of the 1661 slave code. The echoes are so strong on this that even before the words came out of my mouth, the whole line was calling it out. Because it is so abhorrent that the very parliament that we are members of passed one of the most heinous pieces of legislation known to mankind, the 1661 Slave Code. And I would like the students who are here to go and research it and to understand that this slave code was literally adopted in exact form in some colonies and used as a platform for legislation similar to in other colonies. So that when I say that we have been the template on this 166 square miles for the most brutal slave society known in early days, I am not using my words idly. But in spite of all of that, we have emerged therefrom into a world where at independence many expected us to fail, and where in spite of that we have been able to garner global respect and national confidence about what we have been able to and what we can achieve by dint of hard work and a desire for excellence. All of this has happened. And therefore, we ask ourselves today, recognizing that even as we have come on this journey, and even as we have seen some slippage into mediocrity, what should our parliamentary system look like? What should our democracy support today in the third decade of the 21st century? What can we possibly do better? What modern and inclusive governance models now exist from which we can draw examples? And what can we develop ourselves from first principle, recognizing that we want to serve, or that our public policy wants to serve a Barbados that is inclusive, that is fair, that is just, and that creates opportunities for people in this nation to be the best that they can be as a citizen not only of Barbados, but also a citizen of the world at the very time when the planet is in crisis. I say these things, Madam Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, because we must reflect on our current parliamentary system. And in an increasingly connected world, we cannot pretend that others are not watching. Our governance is on display to our citizens, to our region, to our hemisphere, and to our world. And for the first time, we have a genuine chance to be firm craftsmen of our fate, as our anthem calls on us, and to write our names on history's page. But we do so not for the sake of it, but to ensure that the lives of the people of this nation can improve and can be better and can continue to provide a platform for sustained development, even as we face the challenges, as I said just now, of planetary peril, and regrettably, as we are now seeing globally, a world that is moving closer and closer to global turbulence akin to war and conflict. Our generations have not experienced that. And our nation, as an independent country, has not experienced war. And therefore, we must build the resilience, a word that the leader of the opposition does not like, but a word that has defined multiple generations of Barbadians' ability to survive on this rock against the most challenging of circumstances, personally, and indeed for our country nationally. The question never was the old system broken? But rather, given our history and our sociocultural circumstances and modern realities, what could we build that bears our mirror image as a people and better serves our governance needs? Framed that way, Madam Deputy Speaker, the import of the moment should not escape any of us. It is the unique opportunity to shape a governance system and a parliament in our own distinct image as Barbadians. And I may quote from the report at this point. And it says, "At no time in the country's previous history did the citizens have any say through direct consultation as to what they want in and from the parliamentary democracy that we call Barbados. Now that we are a republic, and through this commission and its public engagement, the people of Barbados, for the first time in history, have a say and a choice in all matters relating to Parliament and the governing legislation related thereto. That power of choice is a remarkable expansion of democracy befitting our status as a republic." Unquote. Mr. Speaker, as I've said before, this administration has sought in multiple ways to be a more inclusive government. We've tried to re-engineer services and processes, whether it is formulating new approaches to our justice system, modernizing and sensitizing the social welfare system, creating economies of scale and greater efficiencies by expanding the use of technology across government. And may I say that this issue of technology, as I said, is going to consume us more and more, because it is going to define what levels of sovereignty we really have and what levels of opportunity we can truly make for our citizens going forward. We have tried to ensure that we truly hear the voices of all Barbadians. And in this regard, while there have been criticisms when government has sometimes changed policy or made other decisions, the reality is that these reversals or changes of policy have come about as a result of listening to citizens in our country and responding to the voices of the citizens where possible, recognizing that leadership demands both of us. Sometimes to lead, recognizing what the challenges are, and sometimes to pause and listen to the people. Too often, for political reasons, the act of rethinking a decision is branded as a weakness or labeled as flip-flopping. But let us be real. How many of us in our own lives, think about it, have made decisions and only after consulting with a partner or a parent or a friend or a colleague even, you come to realize what is the fuller impact of the decision that you have sought to make? That's not indecision, Madam Deputy Speaker. That's wisdom. That's partnership. And governance, I assert today, is no different. When this administration listens, reflects, and then reshapes policy to ensure that no one is being left behind, it is not out of fear or failure. It is out of maturity and respect for the people that we serve. And we have seen governments before, oh yes we have, who were only too stubborn to course correct, even when the people cried out, and even when the national consequences were severe. So I say, that is not leadership, that is ego. And in a small nation like ours, where agility is survival, we have to be flexible. We have to listen. And we must always be prepared to move forward, not blindly, but better so. There will be some instances where we will have to stay the course. But that is only when the circumstances which we appreciate that we are defending are clear. And those instances very often are in the interest of national security and rare. So my colleagues here, sorry. I am being told by the clerk that my earlier understanding was correct, that the debate for the representation of people of Ak was in fact the 6th of June 1950, and that this is 75 years to the month that we had this debate in the lower house, and that what was the 17th of August was only the date of Hansard. So I thank the Clerk of Parliament for that correction, and I share it with the Leader of the Opposition, I think, who equally is as proud as I am as the decision taken in 1950 on the 6th of June by this lower house to grant to the people of this nation that power and that right to vote. Thank you. Let me return to where I was. Rubbing shoulders, Parish Speaks, the Ideas Forum. All of these represent an unprecedented approach by this government, having been granted 30 seats in an election not once, but twice, to ensure that even when granted all of the seats, that the things that we would do to stay in touch and to consult with Bajans would be unprecedented. And I made that promise at Bay Street on the 27th of May, 2018, when the cabinet was sworn in. And it is therefore important, even as hard as it is. And there are members in here who will tell you that when you work a whole day, public servants will also tell you that when you work a whole day, and then you come at 6:30 in the evening to engage for another 3 or 4 hours, it requires extraordinary commitment on the part of those. And I want to thank the members of my parliamentary party for holding faith with expanding their duties to include this kind of consultation with the people of this nation as recent as last night in St. George, as I indicated. I thank them because, as I said, I am not aware of any previous government. And I have now been in public life in this nation, formally in Parliament for 34 years, on the road to Parliament and in Parliament for 36 years. And I am not aware of any other government that has sought to consult as widely and as deeply as this one, including in this Parliament now with the establishment of the standing committees on social and environmental matters, on the economy, and on governance for major pieces of legislation. Not aware. And I therefore say to you that all of this therefore prepares us to be able to address the recommendations of this report. We equally had the Constitutional Reform Commission, which also was meeting in parallel to this commission, and that report will also come to this honorable chamber. But I must tell you that we took a clear decision as a government that what came to us as a report was deficient in that it did not speak at all to the responsibilities of Barbadian citizens in the democracy of this country, and it spoke only to rights. and we have therefore paused to get an additional report prepared for us so that when we bring the two reports to Parliament, we will have a holistic approach to this issue of constitutional reform. Madam Deputy Speaker, what I hope, therefore, to do today is to give some idea as to what is contained in this report. And may I say at the outset, this is without prejudice to what the Cabinet of Barbados will ultimately decide. But we want to share and debate the recommendations of the PRC in here and in the upper house, and to be able to ensure that we give it greater distillation. While I cannot present all the recommendations of this report, which is almost 200 pages long, I expect that some of my colleagues in the course of today, and I'm told by the Leader of Government Business that this debate will go into next week, that I expect that in the fullness of the debate, many of the recommendations will be brought to the fore, both here and ultimately in the upper house. May I also say, for the benefit of those who are listening, that this commission, as well as the Constitutional Reform Commission, reflected participation from all sides in here, both the Barbados Labour Party and the Democratic Labour Party. And I believe that the representative on this commission for the Democratic Labour Party was Ms. Maxine McLean, and for the Barbados Labour Party was the Most Honourable Elizabeth Thompson. Equally, the Constitutional Reform Commission had the benefit of the guidance of the former Attorney General, the Honourable Adriel Brathwaite, serving as the representative of the Democratic Labour Party. So that even as we went broad, and even though at that time, because the member for Christchurch South did not see anything but red, the red that the Madam Deputy Speaker is wearing today, the red that elected him to Parliament, the red that allowed him to become a Member of Parliament for the people of Christchurch South, the red that he left for a second time, to go to the blue for a second time. And he left the blue once and might leave it a second time. If we didn't have what Chotna says, if you don't learn to laugh, you may go mad and write your epitaph. But I say simply that in spite of the Democratic Labour Party not having a seat in this honourable chamber, this government saw them, felt them, and was prepared to hear them. And to that extent, their views are also reflected in this Parliamentary Reform Commission, as with the Constitutional Reform Commission. Now, they too, like the Barbados Labour Party, are at liberty to disagree or agree. And there are things in here that I can tell you that the Barbados Labour Party Parliamentary Party will not agree with. And there are things in here, I am sure, that the Democratic Labour Party Parliamentary Party, one here and two in the other place, will also agree or not agree with. So that the important point is that we have elevated discussion and debate. And then we bring action for us to be able to translate recommendations to governance where possible and where necessary. There are one or two matters that I will advert to in this debate that in truth and in fact were not even recommended by the Parliamentary Reform Commission, but which the government, in the exigencies of the country operating in a world of global turbulence, finds necessary to even bring forward, even as we put some of these recommendations on a parallel path for further review. Madam Deputy Speaker, in broad terms, the Commission was mandated by its terms of reference to 1, examine, consider, and inquire into the parliamentary system, process, and procedures, and all other related laws and matters with a view to 1, making recommendations for the strengthening of Parliament and its functions, and 2, to enlarging and strengthening democracy to reflect the wishes of the people of Barbados as they seek to take full ownership of national institutions and processes in the construction of a culturally relevant, inclusive, and modern nation state that reflects Barbados's republican status. I would like now to specifically turn to the recommendations which I propose to address. As I said, I cannot address all, but I will give you a broad brush approach, and others will continue to look at it. The recommendations were organized essentially in chapters covering 8 broad thematic areas. 1, the President. 2, the electoral system. 3, the Senate. 4, the House of Assembly. 5, Code of Conduct. 6, the administration of Parliament. 7, terms and conditions of parliamentary service. 8, security of Parliament. With respect to the President of Barbados, the PRC agreed to retain the titular head of state style as a president who would be elected by both houses of Parliament. They rejected the notion of voting for a president via a popular ballot, and they rejected the notion of the president being the executive head of state. The PRC's decision was based on a desire, I'm told, to save the office of president from the divisiveness of political campaigns and adversarial commentary that could become so acerbic, as we have seen in recent times in our nation's development, so as to taint the office holder or damage the standing of the president in the eyes, fundamentally first, of Bajans. I want to put it another way. There must always be a space and a place where somebody in this nation is above the adversarial cut and thrust of politics. And I have looked at a number of countries across the world where there has been an executive president, and the absence of that safe space there for someone to be able to say, come, let us heal. Come, let us settle. Come, let us remember what we are all on both sides fighting for. I believe that that is an important virtue to have, an important space to keep in a small democracy such as ours, where we have very little buffer and where any prolonged period of instability can put us in trouble as a country. That's just my view. So that when the time comes, the cabinet will make a determination on these issues. But I'm sharing my own personal view with respect, and that which the parliamentary party of the Barbados Labour Party would have reflected in our own internal discussions, that we will continue to support this style. The Commission, however, had a view that the President should serve a single term of 7 years, and agreed that the power of assenting to the bills so that they can become laws, should remain with the President. Our own view is that the current situation of 2 terms of 4 years is preferable to a single term of 7 for all kinds of reasons, including mental deterioration, which sometimes is not always easy to detect, and which, particularly if we have persons who are in their senior years, this is, in the world in which we live, a very real possibility. We have been lucky and blessed as a nation thus far, but as Bajans would tell you, what in catch you, in pass you. Similarly, the Commission recommended that although the Solicitor General will continue to act to advise the President, that the President in extraordinary circumstances may need to have independent legal advice, and that advice should be paid for by the government. That is a very basic recommendation which we obviously could find no difficulty with as a political party or as a cabinet. It also addressed the issue of the electoral system. The Commission recommended that the country keep flexible term elections rather than fixed term elections. I'm aware that the Leader of the Opposition may have a different view on this because he believes in fixed terms. There are others who do, but even when fixed terms exist as it does in the UK, it allows for early calling of elections, and therefore we need to remember that a fixed term does not mean, as it does in the US, a dead stop date irrespective of what happens. But in the United Kingdom, as we saw with Prime Minister Theresa May, you can give notice to have an earlier election than the fixed term, and therefore the right and power of a Prime Minister so to call an election effectively remains. And to that extent, the Barbados Labour Party Parliamentary Party did not see the necessity to change in that sense. But as I said, this is a matter that we want to hear other views on before finally settling upon. The Commission also discussed and rejected the idea of term limits for Prime Ministers. I must tell you that I have always believed in term limits for Prime Ministers and Presidents in order to give as many people an opportunity. But my party, which I lead, has rejected this assertion on multiple occasions. In fact, the former Leader of the Opposition, Bishop Joseph Atherley, led the battle against me on this issue in St. Leonard's School in an annual conference of the Labour Party when we were in opposition, very, very strongly supported by the majority of persons who constituted the parliamentary party at the time. And I believe the current parliamentary party is not in favor of term limits, and it is a discussion that we will continue to have in the country, but it is clearly not one in which I personally am in the majority, and I've had to accept that. The Commission also discussed the issue of proportional representation, preferring instead the retention of the first-past-the-post system. Several persons making submissions to the PRC favored some sort of system of proportional representation to give voice to a large block of the electorate who may have supported a single party, which had, however, gained no seats in the first-past-the-post system. The PRC's rationale given in the report is that proportional representation, while noble in its objective, frequently leads to unstable, minority governments or hamstrung governments, and in the worst case, often causes the collapse of governments at an early stage. It did make two recommendations intended to give effect, some effect, to the public opinion which they received. The first was that there should be a system of national MPs to augment the current system of constituency MPs. Madam Deputy Speaker, this assertion of national MPs was to be able to recognize that Barbados already has a system of constituency MPs, but in this particular instance, the PRC provided a mechanism for national MPs that we don't necessarily agree with, but which nevertheless has been placed before because it was simply a 50% distribution of additional MPs on the basis effectively of a party list to go between parties. We do not believe that that is a workable solution. What we are prepared to do is to recognize that Barbados already has different sizes of constituencies, because we have constituencies that are a single parish. The member for St. Lucie, the member for St. Peter, the member for St. Joseph, member for St. Andrew, the member for St. John, all themselves represent the entire parish. Member for St. Thomas, I don't know if you may know her, ma'am. All represent a single parish. But then we have subsets of that in the form of smaller constituencies, with St. Philip having 3, with St. George having 2, with Christchurch having 5, and with St. Michael having 11. And that the notion simply of us recognizing that there may be a benefit to Bajans going to the poll and voting not just for their constituency MP, but also voting specifically for persons on a national slate, recognizing that it takes all types of skills to be able to constitute a parliament. Now, you may say that some of those people who are not in the business of retail politics comfortably can come via the Senate. But the truth is, when they come via the Senate, they serve at the will of the Prime Minister. Whereas if they came as a result of being a national MP, they serve in their own peculiar right by the people of Barbados and not at the will of a Prime Minister. Now, we accept that there are some who will be strongly for and strongly against. But what we do know, and this was an assertion, if I may refer to previous days, where the Honourable Sir Richard Haynes and Mr. Branford Tate, Sir Branford Tate, both at an earlier time when the then Prime Minister Owen Arthur sought to have a parliamentary reform commission, ironically to be chaired by the same Sir Richard Sheltenham and to have the deputy chairs of Sir Richard and Sir Branford, that they were well enamored with the notion of national MPs, but on the basis of a first-past-the-post system where a person will vote for your constituency MP and then you vote for 5, 7, whatever the number of national MPs are. They recognized and advised me as a young parliamentarian that it may well admit for the existence of independent MPs in a way that Barbados had not seen an independent MP for some time other than those who chose to cross the floor and become an independent, but not elected as an independent MP. And they used the example of the now deceased Francis Chandler and Dame Olga Lope-Seal as examples of persons who might well decide to run on a national slate as an independent, and who Bajans, because of an appreciation of what they had achieved, might be prepared to give them a vote across the board, because they would see that in doing so, they would have done no damage to the government that they wanted to see, the party that they wanted to see become the government, but at the same time, they would have created a space for ordinary Bajans who had excelled to be able to find their way to Parliament as a result of the will of the people putting them there, rather than having to depend on the Prime Minister, the leader of the opposition, or the President to put them in through the Senate. I accept that the only probable way forward is for us possibly to consider, and we will put it to the vote in Parliament at some point, or not to the vote, to the Management Commission, for us to establish a joint committee of both parliaments to look at this issue of national MP and a few other of the more contentious issues, recognizing that the Parliamentary Reform Commission, though it had one member of Parliament sitting on it, was not the Parliament of Barbados acting in its own deliberate judgment as to what it would want to see for its own composition and functioning. And in those circumstances, we expect that we would put before both houses and the Management Commission the opportunity to settle the terms of reference of what that joint working group of Parliament should look at and decide for further guidance beyond that which was received from the Parliamentary Reform Commission. As I said, this is an important debate. The other one that probably will find itself there, and I'll come to it in more detail later, is the notion of a diaspora MP, and whether we ought to reflect the voice of the diaspora in our parliament, as happens in other parliaments in the world. I think Italy is one that does it. And if we're going to do it, how Cape Verde, I'm told by the member for Christchurch West, also has it. And if we are to do it, how it should be so structured and allowed to function. So that working committee of both houses will be an extraordinarily important committee in advancing the work of the Parliamentary Reform Commission. And needless to say, it will reflect the two political parties as well as the independent senators who currently exist within the Parliament. I want to say why I don't support party list voting. And in a very real sense, the Democratic Labour Party, perhaps more than any other in recent times, although the Barbados Labour Party, too, has been a victim of it. There is a danger in our democracy of a small group of people within the context of a political party hijacking the functioning of parties and so reflecting only the image and voice of that small group, that it does not allow the party the transparency that it needs and the oxygen that it must have if it is to be true to the principles that it established. And that is a key issue that can be cured by going to the people, to allow the people to vote and decide. And in a real sense, that is why, even with proportional representation, a lot of the times it is based on party lists. And I believe that the individual voter, the individual citizen in this nation, should be given the chance to choose who they want by name and not to be subject to the election of a party list that is determined in either Robert Street or George Street, and that so long as you get a certain amount, this party list automatically goes in. There may be instances, and not maybe, there are instances where people have said to me, I am a BLP, but I will support XYZ from the other side. I live in a constituency where I believe Mr. Haynes was a good man, and I am going to give Richie Haynes my vote even though I'm a BLP. And there are people who say, Madam Deputy Speaker, you know it only too well. I am a Democratic Labour Party supporter, but I believe a lady by the name of Cynthia Ford, who you do not know, ma'am, is a good woman. She was a good teacher. She has been a community worker. And even though I am a member of the Democratic Labour Party, I want to support Cynthia Ford. I give these two examples because anybody who knows anything about Bajans know that Bajans are fiercely independent in their determination, and the fact that they belong to a political party, most of them, not all, because there are some who will be blind, but the majority of them retain the right to be able to say, this is my view, even though I belong to this political institution. In the countries in which I have seen party-less voting, there is a dangerous descent into autocratic behavior and into a narrow vision that often does not reflect the considerations of the wider public. But this is a matter. I am closer to the end than I am to the beginning. And I see myself as a bridge. And this is a matter that the people of this Parliament, on top of the recommendations of this Parliamentary Reform Commission, with all of the consultations that it has done, will have ultimately to sign off on. Another issue, as I said, which received their attention was the issue of the diaspora and permitting the diaspora to vote in elections. I'm not going to fool you. At some point, I have no doubt somebody will introduce electronic voting in the country. But I know that it has to be at a time when the country as a whole, and that is likely to be generational, is comfortable with that. So let me say up front, this government is not that one at this point unless there is a huge outcry from the public for that to be included. That would facilitate diasporic voting early, easier. But the complexity of organizing diasporic voting in the absence of that is huge. And the Commission does not, at this point, recommend diasporic voting because even though it is desirable, as they said, the complexity and the risk of so doing are simply too great for it to happen. What they have said, and I believe it was a minority opinion, is that there should be one diasporic seat, a diaspora seat in Parliament, similar, as I said, to what other parliaments have, in which parties would canvass and one MP would be voted for by the diaspora to represent the views and the interests of the diaspora. That is one of the matters that we would want to send to the working committee, joint working group of Parliament. The next issue is a simple one, and I think that this is one to which this Barbados Labour Party government has been committed even before the PRC was elected. And Madam Deputy Speaker, that pertains to your office. Trinidad has one. St. Lucia has one. And that is a speaker that is not elected from the members of Parliament, but that is in fact appointed and is allowed to be appointed in such a way where the ability to retain independence becomes easier rather than being elected from out of the bosom of the parliamentary party. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I feel strongly that our system would function better if we had a speaker appointed rather than elected. And I believe while the Commission did not recommend any change to the current system, I am almost certain that the party to which I belong will want to see the appointment of a speaker going forward rather than the election of a speaker from the parliamentary party in which the rest of us serve. Subject to the work to be done and the decision of the Electoral and Boundaries Commission, the PRC also recommended an increase in the number of seats in the lower house and that the seats in Parliament should always be of an odd number to prevent a tie. And this will become important, especially if you have an independent speaker, an appointed speaker, who then would not be given the right to vote. and you can therefore cure the matter by having an odd number of seats. That is something you can look at. I'm not sure where we will end up on it, but it is worthy of further debate. What I will say is that I believe the Electoral and Boundaries Commission is due to review the seats and the composition of seats that we have and the numbers. But I also have come to the view that we may well have to review trying to keep seats within a 10% variation of each other, or a 15% variation of each other, purely because it is not practical and the continued redrawing of constituency boundaries is disruptive to communities. I've heard the leader of the opposition say that lines drawn through the middle of a road in a community is not the best way, and I agree with that. But I also agree that the continuous evolution of boundaries will always cause problems and disruption. We have not had one, I think, since 2003. But the disparity in numbers that we currently have between St. Michael and St. Philip and some of the country parishes will mean that this Parliament will have, as well as the Electoral and Boundaries Commission, to make major decisions very soon because of the pattern of housing in Barbados. We've had a significant increase in numbers in the St. George, Christchurch, St. Philip areas, to the point where there may well be a case, if we are to be in the vicinity of even a 20% variation, which is probably where we would have to go, or 25% variation, that we would still need to do a review of the actual constituencies and to determine whether the country may not need 2 or 3 more constituencies in order to allow us to meet those terms. And all of these are things that will not necessarily await. The EBC 1, Electoral and Boundaries Commission 1, by law, will not necessarily await the outcome of a joint working group of Parliament. And therefore, this is a matter that we will await to hear when the EBC files its report later this year, what will happen and what they will recommend. On the matter of political parties, we all know that there is currently no provision for the registration of political parties. The Commission took the view that political parties ought to be registered and that to qualify as a political party, an entity has to have a chairman, a treasurer, a principal place of doing business, and a bank account. But that failure to register should not be a bar to any grouping calling itself a political party from running in an election. I think the time has come for us to remove the farce of not recognizing that it is political parties that drive our democracy. And the time has come, therefore, to properly regulate and have them registered. And that if we do that, then it will also admit of them also being on the ballot next to the name of the person who is in fact putting themselves forward. There are people like the member for Christchurch South who may feel that they got elected on their own merit. And that the party to which he belonged then, the Barbados Labour Party, had no part in his election. But I will give him the advice that the former Jack Dare, Sir John Stanley Bruce Dare, a distinguished barrister of Barbados, gave me when I became a young lawyer. And he said, "Madam, you will come to learn that you argue a case once in court." I say simply that whatever else the member for Christchurch South will have to say on that issue as to how he got elected and who helped him get elected, that we will argue that case once. This time, not in a law court, but in the court of public opinion in the next election. The bottom line is that we will have to make a determination as a political party as well, whether it is right or fair for a person to be elected on one platform, a body of policies committed to in a manifesto, a pattern of leadership established by the party, and then for the person to make a singular decision that is in variation significantly from that which they made when they were elected by the people in the constituency. There is a strong view that there should be an immediate return to the electorate should a person cross the floor and seek to leave the party from which they were elected to be able to continue to serve. If they win the seat, there's no problem. But what they have done is to go back to the people who elected them in the first place and allow the people who elected them to make the decision whether they want to elect them again in the Parliament of Barbados. Madam Deputy Speaker, I can only say that I am a strong supporter personally of that, because I believe that anything else other than that is disingenuous at best. And it does not leave the room for the people who we represent to be able to have a say. Now, it is said that the next topic which I will address was, well, the bargaining tool to allow persons to be able to ably move from a backbencher to a leader, not of opposition, but of a political party. And that is the question of the political subvention, the parliamentary subvention given to political parties. I happened to be a young member of Parliament when this matter was resolved by the then leader of the Democratic Labour Party and the then leader of the Barbados Labour Party. I happened to be party of the face-to-face discussions that settled it. Face-to-face discussions that I am yet to have in a formal way with the current leader of the opposition, either on education transformation, on crime, or indeed, I hope, on the issue of political subventions to political parties. And I say so genuinely. I am prepared, I say so many times, I am prepared to meet with the leader of the opposition to discuss this matter of political subventions and other arrangements that inform our democracy with respect to our parliament and our existence as members of parliament. But what I do know is that there were certain safeguards that both then leaders put down that should remain sacrosanct. One, that in order to be able to get a political subvention, you need to be able to have secured sufficient votes to get a seat in Parliament. Two, that you need to run a certain number of seats and to get beyond, I shouldn't say to get enough votes to have a member in Parliament, because I'm prepared to vary from that. But there must be a minimum number of votes that a mass-based party gets in this country in order to secure the subvention. And whatever that is will be the subject of discussion between the two political parties. But what we will not do is prostitute the system purely because somebody has decided in the midst of a term to be able to cross and know full well that the rules are predicated upon the number of seats earned, first of all, run by and then earned in the last election to unlock access to the parliamentary political party subvention. If we want to change it, we can change it. But what we're not going to do is unilaterally change it, and then here, you don't like what we've done. And to that extent, therefore, I look forward to meeting with the Honourable Leader of the Opposition and members of his team, if he so desires, in order to discuss this matter of political subventions. But I have gone on record that I've been waiting to meet with him on a number of other fundamental national matters too. And I hope that at some point he will give me the courtesy of a response to arrange a mutually convenient time for an audience. And I'm not linking this with the discussion on crime at all, because crime is above all partisan considerations in this country. And I trust and pray that we will find. I feel so on education too, by the way, but that is a separate matter. Suffice it to say that there should be registration of political parties. The Commission does not believe that a party should be precluded from participation if there is no registration, and that it should not be a bar to any group calling itself a political party. I'm not sure how that would work or what the Commission truly meant by that, but suffice it to say that if there is a rule for registration of parties, I personally believe it should be the rule full stop, rather than believing that you have two sets of rules for entities to function. Another recommendation was the issue that there should be more women encouraged to enter Parliament via electoral politics, and that the age of senators and members of Parliament should be lowered to the age of 18. Well, on the latter, you know my position already, because this government tried to do so at the outset of this term. If you are old enough to vote, you ought to be old enough to represent people in either Parliament of Barbados. And not to do so would be to exclude persons. Can you imagine that there is a young, brilliant student from Ellerslie who is 18, who is old enough to vote, but you tell that young, brilliant student that we cannot appoint you to the Senate? That is nonsense. And I hope, therefore, that this Parliament will allow us to make the changes that will remove this form of age discrimination from our rules. As it relates to the encouragement of more women, there were stronger views as to whether there should be quotas or not. I personally don't support quotas for all kinds of reasons. But I won't get into that because that will be a lengthy, lengthy debate. But suffice it to say that I do believe that we should encourage more women to participate in the system, and that to that extent, we have tried as a government, as you can see, even with the numbers that we have run, but equally, while those continue to be a minority, the reality is that we continue to try to provide a platform for more young women to participate. I am going to announce later today the appointment of the new senator. And you will see that my view that we create a platform for young women to serve will be met by the appointment of that new senator. There was a view by the Commission, by a majority, that the cabinet should be capped at 12 ministers. Well, I can only say that no one in the Commission obviously clearly ever served as a prime minister, because if they did, they would understand that that kind of hobbling of the head of the executive does not work in favor of the country. And I hear all of the romantic talk about why we should cap. I watched Trinidad. Look how big the cabinet is in Trinidad. And I'm not going to in any way comment negatively on it, because I understand that in small societies where cabinet ministers carry a heavier weight in leading and making things happen alongside the public service, that if you want many hands to make light work, then you can't simply be talking about hobbling and narrowing. And the country has paid the price on too many occasions. In fact, one of my criticisms of many of the comments of the leader of the opposition and the former prime minister is that they seem stuck in a 1970s world without recognizing that the world has moved on to the third decade of the 21st century. And I'm glad to realize in listening to the former leader of the Democratic Labour Party, who led the party in the last elections, who openly disagreed with this current leader in discussions recently on a range of matters from cannabis to technology, that she clearly shares my view that there are a number of evolving issues that have taken place in this society, but somehow or the other, the current leader seems to be wedded to a view of Barbados that is akin to that which he saw as a young boy in the 1960s and 1970s. And while there are aspects of this country that ought to be preserved in terms of our values, there is also the recognition that we no longer live in a world where the only influence on our democracy for the preservation of values is Barbados Rediffusion or VOB, the Nation News, and CBC. Whether we like it or not, people receive information and influence from multiple sources now, not just in Barbados, but across the globe. There was a time when in the United States of America, where it was ABC, NBC, CBS, and PBS. And therefore, the ability to be able to hone values and to chart a pathway that could help you secure democracies was much easier, because the spheres of influence were common. We now have diverse spheres of influence, and we are unlikely to get back a common space other than the school system. And when they leave the school system at 18, if you don't embed in them those common values that you need to preserve between 3 years old and 18, God help you, because you do not have a single space where everybody is receiving the same information. And when you add to that the recent evolution of fake news, we then have a real challenge, because it sparks behavior that can go in any direction, at any speed, at any time. So I am very clear that we have to be very cautious and to remember the reality of the world in which we live. Commission supports the retention of a bicameral legislature. And what is a bicameral legislature? Simply put, that we continue to have 2 houses of parliament. I must confess that as a young MP, I believed also only in a unicameral legislature. But I've come to reflect, and even in these last 2 parliamentary terms, that there is a wisdom and benefit to having a bicameral legislature, a second chamber that is reflective, that is not caught up in the hurly-burly of the execution of policy, that is broadly representative of the community. But I equally say that I have come as a personal level. And the parliamentary party to which I lead has diverse views on this. But I do think that the majority at the moment has sided on the retention of the bicameral legislature. It would be interesting to hear the views of the opposition leader, I should say, because they had a representation on the commission too, and of the wider public on this issue. But I suspect that Barbadians will want to retain a bicameral legislature in this day and age still. What they would want, and what I will support, and what the commission also adverts to, is looking at the composition of the Senate to ensure greater representation from both opposition parties and wider national interests from various sectors by way of nominations of the groups that they represent. So in other words, rather than having the head of state make a decision solely as to who should come from the private sector or the labor movement, I think that it is consistent with our commitment to the social partnership for them to have the right to nominate their own representative as a labor movement. That is without prejudice to those of us who are in tune enough to have labor within our political party, and therefore who may want to represent and appoint labor on our own. But labor in its own right, and the private sector in its own right, and the church in its own right, should be given, and young people in their own right, should be given the opportunity to represent their own representative, and the disabled community. So that I believe the composition of the Senate would also be one of the things that would go to the joint working group for us to receive the views of the members of both parliaments as to how they perceive the chamber that they belong to should operate. And the history of the Senate perhaps ought to be explained to people coming out of the old LegCo, Legislative Council, and all of that. And we may want to make those changes to allow it to receive the imprimatur of an independent republic that is changing how it wants to function. There are also some anomalies, and we know it clearly. The Senate receives an allowance. The leader of the opposition should be aware. I'm sure his senators will tell him that. If he himself, I don't think, has ever served in the Senate. And that allowance is more to reflect the fact that previously people served in here from the same landed gentry, and therefore were expected to give of their time rather than to benefit. And there are foolish anomalies. You can't get a pension if you only serve in the Senate in certain positions in the executive, but if you served in the House and then went to the Senate, you can get the pension. Now, what kind of madness is that? So there's some anomalies that we have to correct with respect to what we have inherited with respect to the Senate. The Commission also supported the view of a vigorous question time and the introduction of a system of petitions which would allow petitions with 5,000 or more signatures to be submitted to the Parliament for debate. In other words, an extension of what we've tried to do with the establishment of the standing working committees of Parliament. But this time, giving you on the outside the ability to say, I want to hear my Parliament debate this petition and hopefully take some form of advice or direction from this petition. And the Commission is saying that if the petition is signed by 5,000 citizens who are duly on the electoral register, that the Parliament of Barbados should pause and be able to take the petition. I believe that that is a worthy recommendation and an improvement to how we function. And then there's the issue of the matter of a code of conduct for parliamentarians. This issue became relevant across all parliaments. And the Commission has recommended what they call the Trident Code, an acronym for the attributes thought to be desirable in members of the House elected and nominated: trustworthy, respectable, informed, dutiful, ethical, noble, and truthful. And the code will cover all forms of behavior, and I genuinely believe that once it does, it will have also a mechanism for complaints and a mechanism for sanctions. And I genuinely believe that we as parliamentarians should support the establishment of that formal code of conduct, because it is not enough to say that there's a convention, but we need now, in my view, to move to the assumption of a formal code of conduct that guides our behavior and allows politicians to regain some better, how should I say, to be better viewed by the public and to regain the confidence of the public. In a very real way, there is the regrettable development of people who see politicians as pariahs, without recognizing that political service is public service. And that one of the things that has kept this country safe and stable has been the fact that on all sides, we have been able in the past to attract people of high virtue and high competence as a small island developing state. And this is what has allowed Barbados to punch above its weight. You can take any Prime Minister of Barbados, you can take most members of Parliament in Barbados and place them in an international setting, international Parliament, and they would be as good, if not better, than most, because we have been able to attract some of the best to public life. I hope that by the manner in which we comport ourselves, that we will continue to inspire confidence in the young people of this country. And let me tell you, as a young girl, I watched the affairs in this Parliament. Just as you are watching me today, I watched the Right Excellent Errol Barrow. I watched the late Right Honourable John Michael Jeffrey Manningham Adams, otherwise known as Tom Adams. I watched the debates, and I became inspired to want to represent people and to serve and to fight injustice by watching these debates. And we have to return to a Barbados where we can find a way of ensuring that the best of the best will always want to be able to serve. I believe that we have been lucky in the Barbados Labour Party in recent times to ensure that even though we courted disaster at some point of the way in opposition, that we were able to steady ourselves and land safely. And even the leader of the opposition felt that way because he was a part of the team then in 2018 and 2022. I say that I am deeply concerned about the future of the Democratic Labour Party. And I trust and pray, and it doesn't have to take my advice at all, but I want to say that I trust and pray that its members will stabilize that ship, and that the deep divisive behavior that we have seen in the last, year, 18 months, that led to all kinds of rancor and division, that it be put behind them, because I genuinely believe that that party has served this country well in the past and must be given an opportunity to be able to offer a slate of candidates again that represents the best of who we are as a people and that can command the confidence of the people of Barbados. And I genuinely feel that the Code of Conduct is a major way, the Trident Code of Conduct is only but one of the major ways in which we can reinstill confidence of our citizens in the system of governance that we have, such that they will want to come forward and offer themselves to participate. Madam Deputy Speaker, there is extensive recommendations for the upgrading of the staff, provisioning, and administration of Parliament. And while the Management Commission has taken actions over the last few years to do some of it, the truth is we are still operating in a way that we did when Parliament had far less work to do and did not have as many standing committees functioning. And I therefore believe that that joint working committee of both houses will also be required to address and reflect on the recommendations with respect to a number of terms and conditions and the staffing needs of Parliament. I have always supported ensuring that the opposition has access to proper staff, but I equally support that members of Parliament and backbenchers in particular ought to get more research staff than they currently have. And if we have that research staff in a parliament, as other parliaments do across the world, it will also lift the quality of debate, because it doesn't depend only then on the individual research capacity or time of an individual member of Parliament. And I look forward, therefore, to what the Joint Working Group will advise us on that. It also addresses the issue of security, and that too ought to be appropriately addressed by that Joint Working Group as we go forward. One of the things that my members have spoken about is the need for constituency allocations with respect to development work in constituencies. Jamaica has a form of it, and I would like for that joint working group to also look at what is done in Jamaica and what is done in other members of Parliament. I'm told Trinidad has an element of it too, and I would like for us to be able to therefore see how best we can do so to allow Barbadian members of Parliament to be even better representatives of Parliament than they currently are. And all of this, I should say, is without prejudice to the final determinations we will make on a commission's report called the Thorne Commission, which was done on local government, and to see where exactly those recommendations fit alongside with this Parliamentary Reform Commission, recognizing that those recommendations were intended to be able to allow for even deeper participation without going too far such that you have gridlock, deeper participation on the part of persons with respect to decision-making in the country, particularly at the community level and at the level of the executive. I should say, and earlier, I made the point that there was one matter that the current circumstances of the world and the current national circumstances, I think, demands of us to address in advance of the Joint Working Group of Parliament. And that is the need for ministers to have a right of audience in both houses of Parliament to be able to explain the policy or the legislation that is being piloted through Parliament. Regrettably, in our system, which is a carryover from colonial times, even though you may have line ministers in the lower house, and line ministers in the Senate, a line minister in the lower house is not allowed to go to the upper house and present or answer any questions pertaining to their ministry. And that brief has invariably to be carried by another minister who, even though they have a brief, will not be as versed in the functioning and operations of the ministry as the particular line minister. In Trinidad and Tobago, a line minister from the lower house can go into the upper house to address matters pertaining to their particular ministry. A line minister from the upper house can come into the lower house to address matters pertaining to their ministry. And when you really think about it, that is the way it should be. And there should not be an artificial division that reduces the quality of debate in the way in which it happens now. They go further. The Attorney General has the right to be able to go to either house, I am told, to address matters not pertaining to his ministry alone, but across other areas of legislative concern in other line ministries. And when you think of it, it makes sense, because each ministry has a legislative program. And the AG is really the one who holds that legislative program together that goes to both the lower and the upper house. So I am signaling that the government will move to be able to provide that right of audience to ministers in order to enhance even the quality of this parliament before we go. Because lest we forget, the next parliament is not due until 2027, I believe constitutionally, not before May or June of 2027. And in the world in which we live, if a week in Harold Wilson's England used to be a long time, well then a day in today's world is an eternity. And we believe that we must do certain things to strengthen and improve the efficiency of our democracy and our parliament and our executive. And this is one that cannot wait the reflective consideration of the joint working group. There is one other matter that requires comment on my part. And I indicated that we would address this issue of pensions and pension age. The Commission made the following recommendations of terms and conditions and pensions, which is a variation from the system that we currently have. Currently, terms and conditions of members of parliament and ministers, parliamentary secretaries are anchored to the public service increases. The Commission recommended the establishment of a committee of persons qualified in actuarial science, labor matters, accountancy of other related skills to make decisions on parliamentary salaries and other conditions. I don't know that I support that. Jamaica has it. There are members in my parliamentary party who support it. I am still supportive of the old system that ties us to the public service, because I think it removes the rancor and a lot of the other distrust that surrounds itself over the terms and conditions. I do believe that we have to have a serious discussion on these terms and conditions. And I say so conscious that I am on my way closer to the end than the beginning. But there are a number of people who may not want to serve, and they need to look at what happens in other parliamentary democracies across the world to make those decisions. And let us be clear, let us be very clear. You can have a strong government with a weak public service. You can have a weak government with a strong public service. But what happened in the last decade is that we had a weak government and a far weaker public service than we wanted over the years. And that is as a result of multiple considerations over the decades that needs to be improved. We are not where we want yet to be with the further professionalization of our public service. We are affected by the absence of skills in the country. And let us think about it. 50 years ago, a young person had far fewer options for careers than they do today. So that the public service of Barbados and the political class of Barbados got the best of Barbados. But from the time we opened up opportunities for people to serve in multiple different disciplines and to be able to emigrate and to be able to find all other kinds of interesting careers, all of a sudden, we have suffered in the public service, in the disciplinary services, and indeed in the political class. And it is a question that will keep coming up in this country. I say so after 36 years of public service. And I have seen the difference. And that is why, even just now, I made the point that we have to be able to attract the best of the best to be able to enter representational politics. But we also need, even if we are not going to get them for the whole 20 or 33 years or whatever, we need to be able to attract talent to give us at least 5 to 10 years in the public service, especially in the professional areas, in engineering, in law, in economics, in the area of medicine. Because if we don't have it, the public space suffers. I don't mind all the talk about advisors or consultants. Invariably, those only come into play because we do not have a sufficient flow of the requisite expertise in order to be able to go forward. When this country engages the best, this country succeeds. I recall, and the Honourable Attorney General will recall because he was in the cabinet at the time, that when we took the decision to go, he was in the parliamentary party and then at the cabinet when the decision came, to go to arbitration with Trinidad and Tobago, people said, don't go. Do not go. It was taking too long. He was in cabinet. It would take too long. And it would cost us too much. Don't mind that the then Prime Minister, the Honourable Sir Harold St. John, he wasn't Prime Minister at the time, but he had been responsible for almost, he and Frank De Silva and others at different times over a 30-year period in trying to get a fishing agreement with Trinidad and Tobago. We couldn't deal with our energy resources. We couldn't deal with fish. And we took the decision to engage the best legal representation that we could secure internationally in arbitration and in law of the sea matters. And we got in and out in less than 2 years and at a cost of $6 million at a time when people feared that we would be there for 10 years and that we would have to spend tens of millions of dollars in order to resolve this matter. I speak again of our journey to restore macroeconomic stability in this country. And much has been said about who we've hired and what they have been paid. And I say to you once again that in every instance, when we hire the best, we get the best results. The Leader of the Opposition made much ado about what we pay to a consultant who has advised us on tax reform. And this country doubled its corporation tax in the last year. He has made much ado about White Oak. But White Oak has not only helped us successfully restructure debt in this country, and their fee is cents in the dollar. Now, it is true that the debt is large, and therefore that would have increased what they have been able to pay. But if you go to anybody in Barbados and say, I want you to help me recover something, and I'm only going to give you 20 cents in each dollar. Not $20, not 20%. They say, you mad? Why deserve more than that? Look at all the scale of fees across every profession. So that I say to us, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we have to examine as a nation, separate from this Commission's report, how we attract talent and retain talent, recognizing that the population of Barbados is lesser in 2020 than it was in 2010. And the immigration bill will come to Parliament soon. I will not anticipate the next debate this afternoon, where the country has been able to do exceptionally well, even in the midst of the unfolding Middle East conflict, and which reflects not the judgment of us in here, not the opposition, not even the government, but reflects the judgment of the international capital markets, even beyond the credit rating agencies. But that will be dealt with later today. So the Commission recommends the establishment of this standing committee that would reside within the Management Commission to advise on terms and conditions of Parliament. And it makes recommendations for all kinds of stipends at the lead of government business in the House and the Senate. And I know, because I served as one, they have additional duties beyond others, should they not receive a stipend for that. And similarly, the opposition does not now have, because there's only one in here, but there would normally be a case where you would have lead of opposition business if there's more than 2 or 3 people in the opposition in the lower house, and equally in the Senate. They've made all other kinds of recommendations for benefits. Most people do not know that members of Parliament do not have health insurance. Members of Parliament do not get vehicles. Many members of Parliament do not have access to either an official vehicle or indeed even a duty-free vehicle. And I am not suggesting that they should, but a lot of Bajans feel that they do. And there are a whole host of other things that that report addresses, including that the leader of the opposition should receive a travel allowance and official transportation on state and ceremonial occasions. And I fully support that, because I do not believe that the leader of the opposition of any nation should be butting about trying to find a part when there is an official function, or coming in hot and sweaty, not being able to participate in state affairs. Similarly, and if you go back, the history of these matters is very, very interesting. Errol Barrow and Tom Adams agreed to peg the salary of the leader of the opposition at on or about, I believe, just below the Speaker's salary, and to ensure that the arrangements befitting of a leader of the opposition in a Parliament in terms of payment was put in place, and it was an all-party agreement in order to treat to these issues. I am not going to address the issues of the terms and conditions of current prime ministers, because even with the what do you call it, the national honors. I have understood the disposition of some to be petty, and if I have to be a human living sacrifice for those that come after me, so be it. But what I will do is that I also recognize that we do need to put in place arrangements with respect to former presidents or governors general and former prime ministers. And I give the assurance the Commission recommends a set of measures, all of which I agree with, with one exception. I believe that a person who has served as president of Barbados, and I disagree on one thing with them too, but a person who has served as president of Barbados or governor general of Barbados has lived in State House, previously government house. When they go to return to their own home, in many instances there is work to be done. They've got to outfit certain things again, especially if they've spent more than 3-4 years in office, appliances, different other things. They should be given a duty-free allowance for appliances and furniture for the first year after leaving office as part of resettlement. This commission also recognizes that they should receive the benefit of administrative and other support, both former prime ministers and former presidents. I agree with that, because they continue to play a role in the country's democracy. They say that a car should be kept, I think it's 5 or 7 years, but whatever it is, it really is too long for them at this stage, because you really don't want a former governor general or a former prime minister in a car breaking down on the highway. And therefore, I feel that a suitable amendment to that would be 3 years or 4 years. And I feel they should have a driver, a continuous driver. If you are the President of the United States of America, you continue to have both excuse me, security support and other support, and you still refer to everybody as Mr. President. I still call Prime Minister Stewart Prime Minister Stewart. When I write him, as I've had calls to do recently, I say, "Dear Prime Minister Stewart," because he was Prime Minister of this country. And respect is due. What most people don't know, and I certainly am not making the case to change it now, but what most people don't know is that the President and the Chief Justice, I think I'm informed by the Clerk of Parliament, receive tax-free pensions, or no, receive full pensions, sorry, not tax-free, receive their pension, the full salary that they had at the end of retirement as pension. But because of the divisiveness of politics, the Prime Minister doesn't. Now, I am sending the message that I am not changing it. But I hope that others beyond me will change it. Because it is only fair that if you have 2 offices of state attracting that benefit, the 3rd office so shall. But I will not change it. The bottom line is that the Commission also recommends something known as a resettlement grant. And a resettlement grant is members of Parliament do not get unemployment benefit. They pay national insurance, but they're forced to pay national insurance as self-employed persons. And therefore, when they leave here and they have not gone a new job, or if they are in a profession, they've not resumed their profession, there is a period of time when they will not earn. And in the United Kingdom and other parliaments in the Commonwealth, there is something known as a resettlement grant, which gives them a period of money for either 3 or 4 months or 6 months or however long it is. And it is something that we will have to consider, I believe, for our own parliamentarians particularly those who are not in a position to establish an independent profession, but who depend in a small society on being employed by companies. And if there is a change of government, regrettably, the people in the non-political sphere may have more fear, not imposed by the government of the day, but just do not want to be able to reach out and to employ people who may otherwise have been associated with a political party. It is an unfortunate thing. And I think that this government has done enough to show that where possible, we can work with people with all sides, especially if it is to build Barbados. But I accept that even in the private sector, that may not be the mood of some, and to that extent, there may be wisdom in this resettlement grant. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, this brings me to the issue of pensions. And the fact is that the early age of the drawing of pensions under the current rules is 50 years old. In fact, the irony is, I think when the pension rules changed, the only person to have been there before and still living under the old rules, having been elected as the first member of parliament after Barbados became an independent nation, was actually my father, who was elected in 1969 as MP, the junior MP then, to the city of Bridgetown, where he served with my grandfather for 2 years before then becoming the Member of Parliament in single-member constituencies in 1971. So that there were previous pension arrangements. And I think his pension is something like $300 and something from that day, and those old pension arrangements. This commission recommends, in consonance with what we have done with increasing the age, that the age be increased to 60 years old for anyone to be able to draw a pension. And I believe that this is something that we should support, but I also believe that we need to recognize that there are some people who may not want to wait and leave their monies in the system, because people don't understand that parliamentarians contribute to their own pensions in a major way. But people may not want to leave their monies in the system and may want simply to draw a gratuity at a younger age and move. Now, why is this important? This government has made sure that anybody under contract can draw a gratuity not just for a full completed year, but for a prorated portion of the year. And to that extent, I think we need to be flexible enough to allow a person who may have been elected in their 20s, decide that they're only given 10 years, they don't want to hang around, let them take their gratuity and move rather than having to wait to draw either gratuity or pension until, as it is now, 50, or where we are carried to 60. And that flexibility is consistent with the evolution of the modern world. This is the same parliament that introduced portability of pensions. And to that extent, I believe that this matter ought equally to be addressed by the working committee, the joint working committee of both houses, recognizing that the society demands of us, in the same way that their pensions have increased in the age base, that ours will too. There will be one or two instances, and the Honourable Attorney General, I'm sure, may speak to it, because we actually believe that there is a case for the reduction of the age in the instance of a few professions, for example, police and possibly other professions where the wear and tear is so great that there may be a case for an earlier pension. In other words, there cannot be a one-size-fits-all prescription for everyone. I believe, Madam Deputy Speaker, that this has been good work. And we have a responsibility now to carry forward this good work. As I said, there is still the Thorne Commission, which will have to be debated. I'm not sure if anyone in here knows who that commission was named after or when. There is also the Constitutional Reform Commission, but their report will await the additional report that must come on the responsibilities of citizens, consistent with what we settled in the Charter of Barbados in November of 2021 on the eve of our becoming a republic. That citizens of Barbados have not only rights, but responsibilities. And against that backdrop, what should be the responsibilities that we enshrine in our Constitution so that every young boy and girl knows what is expected of them as a citizen of this nation, rather than only believing, as many have been told over the last 59 years, that we have rights. Of course we have rights. But we don't only have rights, we have responsibilities. And if we didn't exercise those responsibilities, even just to maintain the house, it would start to fall. Think of it. A house that is closed up, that has nothing being done to it. The tiles will blow. The plumbing will stop working. The place will get, moldy. And therefore the country, the nation is no different. If we as Barbadians do not exercise the duty of care and the duty of responsibility, duty of care to the nation and to each other, duty of responsibility to maintain and build, to be firm craftsmen of our faith, we will not enjoy the kind of quality of life that we want to enjoy, and we will not be able to assume the greatness that this nation is capable of and that so many have worked hard to try to lay the foundations for. I believe, therefore, that the time has come for us to start the process of taking decisions. And I look forward to the debate in this honorable chamber. I look forward, and I suspect the commentaries the debate may take maybe 2 or even a third day, because I don't think that there is anybody who really doesn't want to participate in this debate. It is so important in both houses. But whether it takes us 2-3 days in here and 2-3 days in the Senate, and whether it takes the working group time, I believe that we have a responsibility, recognizing that it is more than half a century ago that decisions were made about the functioning of this parliament and this democracy, and to that extent, how we function is not sufficiently reflective of the modern independent republic that we have become. Madam Deputy Speaker, Barbados has had a history of being a strong democracy, and long may that be so. Barbados has had a history of free and fair elections. We have in fact had one general election and one by-election since becoming a republic. And if you would recall, in 2021, there were those who stoked fear and said that if we become a republic, we become a banana republic, and what will happen to our democracy and what will happen to our elections? And we've seen 2 elections conducted without violence, without fear and rancor, and without intimidation, and that have delivered the will of the people. There are things that have to be done, like the enumeration exercise that is being undertaken shortly by the Electoral and Boundaries Commission. I spoke earlier to the review of the constituency boundaries in accordance with the Constitution and the laws of the land. Those things will be done. But we must also ensure how we can continue to deepen the involvement of ordinary citizens in our democracy and in our parliament, and how we can equally improve the efficiency of our parliament in serving the people of this nation. And that is what this exercise is intended to do. I want to address one other point. Conscious that we will hear it, there is a cost to democracy. And those who want to avoid the cost to democracy will confront the reality of anarchy ultimately. The checks and balances that we have ought to be protected and enhanced. And the notion that small country means small governance is a fallacy. Indeed, as I said, the responsibility of those who must govern, often in small states, is greater, particularly on the parliamentary and political class, because of the very fact that our structures of governance are not as complex. Do we remember that Barbados only had a Ministry of Environment since the 1980s? And when the then Tom Adams introduced it, people made laughing sport of it. I think that the Honourable Aaron Truss became that first minister. And yet, environmental matters rank at the top of almost all matters, not just in this nation, but globally. The Ministry of Innovation, Science and Technology is something that people laughed and asked, where am I going with it? I haven't included AI in its name, but effectively, that is the leading entity that is helping us to manage and navigate what is the greatest threat to our sovereignty. And then there are those who would seek to cultivate the fake news such that in a world of narrowcasting as opposed to broadcasting, to use the language of the former Chief Rabbi of London, Jonathan Sacks, that we find ourselves now not being able to shape society in the ways that we want. I stood outside those curtains right here in this chamber as a young MP. And the then member for Christchurch South, a man who I had tremendous respect for, pulled me one side. He used to sit next to me. I was the youngest person on the front bench. And therefore, by reason of age and election, in 1994, I sat at the bottom of the front bench. And he sat next to me in the very last seat. And both of us were walking back into this chamber. And we stopped just in front of the green curtain before entering the chamber. And he held my hand. And he said, Motley, look in there. And anybody who knew him would know exactly how he talked. He said, a time is going to come in this country when you are not going to be able to use conventions to guide behavior and to guide action, and that you're going to need legislation to require it, to mandate it, because there are too many people who are getting their influences from too many different sources that have no common origin nor no common values base. You understand what the gentleman was telling me almost 30 years ago? And I have lived to see the wisdom of that former Prime Minister of Barbados come to light. And I say to this nation, there is a cost to democracy. Those who believe that our parliament is too big, I disagree. Those who believe that our cabinet is too big, I disagree. We may find ways of tightening it up or down, depending on the exigencies of the moment. But this is not a shop that you are running. This is a country, a nation. And let us be clear that we would spare no expenses if we were a university or if we were a company or whatever to ensure that that which we have in structure is appropriate to the circumstances of what we must do, whatever that mission is. Whether it is educating if you are a university, or whether it is building out and sustaining the company if you are a company. And I'm saying to us, the complexity of this world today requires us to pause and get the architecture correct. Whether this parliament increases by 5 or 7 or 9 or 11 or 2 or 3, we're not talking about increasing by 20 and 30. But what we do need to understand is that if Bajans are operating in real time because of technology, that in a very real sense, they have to operate in real time also in terms of governance. And I want to read what my Minister of Industry sent to me, ironically this morning, of Innovation, Science and Technology sent to me this morning, without knowing what I would have to be addressing here today. And he said to me, Prime Minister, you said something to Mike Bracken, who is the designer of gov.uk, the digital services in the UK, the person who really brought the UK into the digital world, who you met with at Parliament when I was your Chief of Staff, that has stuck with me. In effect, it was that the lack of digital development is why Barbadians' trust in government has eroded so much in recent decades. Every day since, I have agreed with you more and more. And yesterday, we had a deep dive meeting on identity, in particular the Trident identity, but the idea of identity in general. And it dawned on me that in 1979, when the first ID card in Barbados was done right, to maybe the mid-1990s, late 1990s, that blue card with plastic lamination was some of the most sophisticated systems and technologies of its time. The card said definitively who you were. But that is why it had so much power and trust. But by the mid-2000s, the first decade of the 21st century, that same card or the red book for a driver's license would have been laughable, because how much has technology advanced from the mid-90s to the mid-2000s? When we look at the fundamentals of what we must do now as an administration, to have a highly competent Barbados that people can trust again, we must have a world-class identity system. We must give them the option of a cashless economy. We must have more services on e-government, just as we've done with the certificate of character and so many others that we've rolled out. Although, in my opinion, not as quickly and not as many as we would like to. We must protect Bajans in terms of cybersecurity and not just view physical security as the risk. We must pursue a framework for data intelligence, telecommunications, security management, logistics and traffic management, and of course, education and skills management. And this will cost the country to reposition it. It'll cost us probably a couple $100 million. I don't know where it will land us, but I know that in an economy and in a country such as ours, if we are to protect democracy, this is what we must do. And therefore, the expansion of any numbers in this honorable chamber by a few will not cost us our democracy, will not cost our democracy, sorry, but it will cost us our democracy. And if you understand exactly what I mean, remember the statement, or if you don't understand, remember the statement that if you think education is expensive, try ignorance. If you think that we have enough to protect our democracy, I say to you that we may well be at risk of undermining it. Let us recognize that half a century or more, 54 years, has passed, and that we would be doing ourselves a serious disservice if we allow this report to stay on the shelves of our libraries and to gather dust and to avoid the urgent need for execution and implementation. There is not everything in here that we agree with, but what we do know is that what it has done is to tee up for us the decisions that must be made by a Barbados that will start to turn 60 years old from the 1st of December of this year until the 30th of November of next year. And at 60, if you can't get it right, God help you. I trust and pray, therefore, that this report will be treated with the seriousness with which it was intended to be, and that it will lead to a substantive and appreciable improvement in the quality of our democracy, but more importantly, in the actual lives of ordinary people and the trust that they have for the systems of governance will improve correspondingly. And I ask each person to recognize that while we may not agree on everything, that it is the majority that must go forth, and that it is with a sincere commitment to the noblest aspects of our democracy that this government puts it before you in this year, 75 years after this honorable chamber passed the amendments to the Representation of the People's Act that laid the foundation for the democracy of Barbados. I hope that this generation will be equal to the task in the same way that the generation of Sir Grantley Herbert Adams was equal to the task of building the foundations of our democracy, and the generation of the Right Excellent Errol Walton Barrow were equal to the task of building an independent Barbados. I'm obliged to you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Madam. Beg to move that this.
I beg to move, Madam Deputy Speaker, the moving of this of the resolution before this honorable chamber. Thank you. Second it, and reserve the right to speak.
Beg to second that, ma'am. Right to speak. Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of the House until 20:03 this afternoon.
The question is that this honorable chamber be suspended until 20 minutes to 3, ma'am? Madam, 20 minutes to 3? 20 minutes to 3. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This honorable chamber is now suspended until 20 minutes to 3.